Bobby Fischer commits a huge blunder in the round one of the World Championship match against Boris Spassky, which leads to his defeat in the match. So Boris Spassky is playing with the white pieces, and he was the current world champion at that time, and Fischer is playing with the black pieces here. So this is the Queen's Gambit being played now, and now the pawn to d5 attacks the center Queen's Gambit pawn, and knight is played to c3, and now this is the Queen's Gambit decline three knight variation, and bishop comes to b4, pinning the knight, and e3 is now played, and Fischer immediately castles on the king side, and bishop goes to d3, and the pawn push to c5 happens, and Spassky also castles on the king side as well. So though both players are castle on the king side with active pawn position in the center of the board. So here Fischer plays knight to c6. Here it was preferred to play d into c4, which could have given a better play for Fischer, but didn't happen. And after that, a3 is played, pushing away the bishop, and the bishop goes to a5, and the knight retreats to e2, supporting the central pawn of the d pawn over here. And after the pawn takes the pawn, the bishop takes back the pawn, and the bishop goes to b6. Once this pawn is taken, you can take back with your bishop here. And after the pawn is taken, Fischer exchanges queen as an in-between move, and rook takes the queen back, and Spassky's rook is now on this open d line. And after that, this pawn is taken, and immediately Spassky plays b4, pushing the bishop away from this f diagonal which is pointing to the f square, and the bishop goes to e7, and bishop to b2. Spassky immediately ensures his bishop, and both these bishop are on these semi-open or semi-active diagonals, and, and they basically dangerous pieces now. So bishop comes to d7 here, and the rook comes to c1, and after that the rook of Fischer comes to d8, and knight jumps to d4, and the knight takes the knight, and the knight takes the knight back as well, and the bishop goes to a4, attacking the rook here. So instead of moving the rook, uh, the bishop is now brought back to b3, and the bishops get exchanged, and the knight takes the bishop, and after that the rooks get exchanged, and the rook is now in d1, and Fischer brings his rook to c8 on this open c line, and the d line is in the control of Spassky as well. So now the Spassky tries to bring his king into the game, and the king moves to f1, and so Fischer also does the same, and the king goes to e2, and because of the bishop here, Fischer cannot immediately bring his king closer to the board, which actually becomes decisive actually. And after the knight to e4 move, the rook goes to c1, looking for a rook exchange, and the rooks are exchanged by Fischer, and the pawn to f6 is now pushed, and the knight jumps to a5, attacking the pawn over here, and the knight goes back to d6, protecting this pawn, and after that the king goes up to d3, and the bishop goes to d8, attacking the knight over here, and the knight immediately jumps back to c4 with the protection of this king here, and bishop goes to c7 with the intent of attacking this pawn, which actually becomes the mistake in the game. So knight takes the knight, and bishop takes the knight, and Spassky just leaves that pawn as it is, and as it is a trap. So b5 is played, and immediately bishop to h2 is played by Fischer basically. So the idea is to bring this pawn here and to get it exchanged and bring your bishop back into the game. But because of the position of the king, Spassky had a better position. So Spassky first blocks the retrieval of this bishop with the g3 move, and Fischer immediately plays h5, looking to bring your pawn here. So once it get exchanged, this pawn will come here, and the bishop can take back the pawn, and it can escape, and you can win one or two pawns in the process. But the king comes to e2, and h4 is played now by uh, Fischer, and instead of taking the pawn, the king comes to f3, and now the king goes to e7, and now the king goes to g2, attacking this bishop over here. So after the pawn gets taken, this pawn takes the bishop back, and now this bishop is basically trapped here. It doesn't have anywhere to go, and Fischer was forced to take this pawn, and now the king wins this pawn. So this uh, it's not bad. You can't say like that, because you get two pawns, and these two pawns are dangerous pawns. So there's only one pawn defending these three pawns. So if these pawns get exchanged, you can simply push these pawns. So basically, so but the king comes to d6, and after that a4 is played, protecting, creating this pawn structure. So these pawns are connected now, and the king comes to d5, and the bishop comes to a3. Spassky used this time to make his position better, and once the king goes to e4, the bishop goes to c5, protecting this pawn. So you can't do anything about that pawn. So the pawn is pushed to a6, attacking the pawn, and Spassky didn't want to go for a pawn exchange and just push to b6. And after that, f5 is played, and the king goes to h4. And after that, Fischer plays the mistake of pushing f4, and this pawn is immediately accepted, e into f4, and the king takes back the pawn. And now the king goes to h5, and now the king to f5 is played by Fischer as well, and the bishop retreats to e3, and the king goes to e4, attacking the bishop, and to bishop to f2, and the king again goes here, because unless you go back here, the king will come here and this pawn will be gone. And after that, the bishop again goes to h4, and the pawn push of e5 happened, and now the bishop goes to g5, and continues pushing the pawn to e4, and now the bishop goes to e3, preventing this pawn from being pushed any further. And also it controls these two important square, which basically means that the king cannot come down through here, so it have to go through all this way here to get to attack the bishop here. So the king had to move up. So the king moved up, and g4, king to g4 is played, and after that the king goes to e5, which was a mistake. It was better to keep your king here to e6, and didn't happen in the game. And Spassky immediately places his king to g5. Now you have to go back here to protect the pawn, but that pawn is lost anyway. So the king goes to d5, and king to f5 is played now. And after that, the pawn push of a5 happens. Basically, these two pawns are now disconnected. Both need protection. And after this, this bishop to f2 move is played, and the pawn is pushed to g5, which is an accuracy. King to d6 was preferred here, and the king basically takes the pawn, which allows the king, the black king, to come down the board. And Spassky brings his king to the pawn, and Fischer goes for the other pawn, and Spassky takes this pawn. And after that, these pawns get exchanged, and the king goes to d5 now, and Fischer brings his kings to b5, attacking this pawn, and also allowing this passed pawn to come forward. And after that, the king goes to d6, and basically at this position, Fischer resigns the game, because I'll just show you a continuation. a4 is played, and the king goes to c7, which basically means that the bishop can move now, because that pawn is protected. So the bishop moves to d4, and the king comes to c4. So all he had to do is to place his bishop as far away as the king as possible, and it goes to the farther square h8, which basically means that even if the pawn comes here with the support of the king, he can just take it, and just take this pawn will be taken, and the other pawn, white pawn, will be queen. So a combination will look like this. After that pawn is taken, this pawn will basically queen, and once the bishop is attacked, it can go back. And now here is an interesting position here. So if you push your pawn and queen now, it's going to be a stalemate and a draw. So it's a tricky position. You need to understand these games in your position, because if you queen now, this king won't have anywhere to go, and also this the king itself is blocking the black pawn, so it can go forward. So the king black is out of moves, and it will be a stalemate. So an in between move of bishop to g7 is played, and after that the king is forced to move. Then the queen happens, and now you can simply win the game, basically, because the queen is on the board. There's a bishop there, and you can just exchange this bishop for that pawn if you want to, or then you can easily win with the king and the queen on the board. So this was the round one, which Fischer lost the match. Very close game, closely fought, but the mistake was an error in calculation from the side of Fischer, I think, which costed him this match. So thanks very much for watching. We will be back with more such Fischer Spassky World Championship matches in the future as well. So we'll be back soon.